I always thought our life was solid, unshakable. I worked hard to build something lasting for Elena, our daughter Amelia, and myself. It wasn't perfect, but I believed in the foundation we had: honesty, loyalty, and effort. That belief started to crack the day I saw her phone light up on the counter with Adrian's name. It was a Sunday morning. Elena was upstairs getting ready, humming a song I didn't recognize, while I was making pancakes for Amelia. The phone buzzed again, drawing my eye to the screen. Adrian's name stared back at me like a challenge, accompanied by a message. "Last night was unforgettable. Can't wait to see you again." I felt my chest tighten, but I didn't pick up the phone. Instead, I flipped the pancake in the pan, my movements slower, more deliberate. I didn't need to jump to conclusions. Not yet. But the uneasy feeling in my gut wouldn't go away. When Elena came downstairs, she looked radiant, smiling as she kissed Amelia's cheek. "Morning, love," she said to me, stealing a piece of bacon from the plate I had just set down. I smiled back, but it felt forced. The rest of the day, I watched her closely. How she laughed a little too hard at a joke on TV, how her phone stayed face down on the table. It wasn't like her to hide things, and yet, here she was, keeping something from me. By the time Amelia was in bed that night, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was off. When Elena showered, I glanced at her phone, still sitting on the counter. It wasn't locked. My hands trembled as I scrolled through the messages with Adrian. It wasn't just one message. It was dozens. Some flirty, some outright suggestive. My chest felt heavy as I read his words, filled with entitlement and arrogance, and worse, her replies that encouraged him. The water shut off upstairs, jolting me back to reality. I set the phone down exactly where it had been and stepped back into the living room, my mind racing. By the time she came down, drying her hair, I was sitting on the couch, pretending to watch TV. She leaned over to kiss my cheek, and I froze for a moment before letting her. That night, I barely slept. My mind was a whirlwind of anger, hurt, and disbelief. How long had this been going on? What did Adrian offer that I couldn't? I thought about confronting her right then and there, but something stopped me. A voice in my head told me to wait, to think, to plan. I wasn't the kind of man who acted impulsively, and this situation wasn't going to change that. The next morning, I dropped Amelia off at school and went to work as usual, though nothing about the day felt normal. My mind was split between my responsibilities and the dark cloud of doubt hanging over my marriage. Elena texted me around lunchtime, asking how my day was going. I stared at the screen for a moment before replying with a simple, "Fine. You?" Her response was chipper, as if nothing had happened. "Great. Love you." I stared at those words for a long time. Love you. How could she say that to me while carrying on with another man? That night I decided. No, I vowed, to find out everything. Not to punish her, but to protect myself and Amelia from whatever storm was brewing. The days that followed were a blur of routine and quiet observation. I didn't confront Elena, though every fiber of my being wanted to. Instead, I paid closer attention to the details I'd previously overlooked. The way she guarded her phone, how her smile seemed brighter when she mentioned work, and how her schedule became more demanding with last-minute meetings and late nights. I started keeping a journal, jotting down her comings and goings, not out of obsession but out of a need to piece together the timeline of her betrayal. I wanted to see the whole picture, not just fragments. If I was going to act, it would be with certainty, not accusations built on half-truths. One evening, as I was cleaning up after dinner, Amelia tugged on my sleeve. "Daddy, why isn't Mommy here for bedtime anymore?" Her big brown eyes, so full of innocence, nearly broke me. I crouched down to her level, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Mommy's working really hard right now, sweetheart. But I'm here, okay? Always." She nodded, but the question lingered in her eyes. I hugged her tightly, silently promising that no matter what happened, I'd shield her from the fallout of whatever this mess was. The next day, I made my first move. On my lunch break, I drove to Elena's workplace. It wasn't unusual for me to surprise her with coffee or lunch, so I knew it wouldn't raise suspicion. When I arrived, I parked across the street and watched the building entrance. I didn't plan on going inside. I just wanted to observe. Around 1:15 p.m., she stepped out. She wasn't alone. Adrian followed close behind, his hand brushing hers as they walked to a sleek black car parked nearby. He opened the passenger door for her, and she slipped inside with a laugh that echoed in my ears even from a distance. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. Seeing it with my own eyes was like a punch to the gut. It wasn't just texts or suspicions anymore. It was real. Flesh and blood. Betrayal in broad daylight. I tailed them discreetly, keeping several cars between us. They drove to a small cafe on the other side of town, one I recognized but had never been to. They sat outside, talking animatedly, her laughter carrying across the patio. Adrian leaned forward, touching her hand again, and she didn't pull away. It took every ounce of self-control not to storm over and demand answers. Instead, I took a few pictures with my phone, shaky but clear enough to see them together. Proof. Not that I needed it for myself anymore, but I wanted to have it just in case. Just in case this turned into something bigger. That night, I tried to act normal. Elena came home late, smelling faintly of wine and perfume that wasn't hers. She kissed my cheek, murmured something about a long day, and went upstairs to shower. I sat on the couch, staring blankly at the TV, my stomach churning. The house felt colder than usual, despite the heat kicking on. When she came back down, I smiled at her. "How was work?" She hesitated for the briefest moment, then replied, "Busy. You know how it is." "Yeah," I said, my voice calm, betraying none of the storm inside me. "I know." She sat next to me, scrolling on her phone, completely unaware of the battle I was waging within myself. I looked at her, at the woman I had built a life with, and felt a mix of anger, sadness, and something I couldn't quite name. I wasn't ready to confront her. Not yet. But in that moment, I knew one thing for certain. This wasn't going to end quietly. I couldn't let my emotions dictate my actions. I had to be methodical, patient, and smarter than both of them. It wasn't just about confronting Elena or exposing Adrian, it was about protecting what mattered most, Amelia and the life I had built for her. So, I started laying the groundwork. The first step was gathering more evidence. I upgraded the family's shared cloud storage and synced Elena's phone to it under the guise of needing a backup system for all our devices. She didn't question it, busy as she was with her late nights and meetings. Over the next week, her texts, photos, and call logs flowed into the cloud like a dam had burst. Every message to Adrian, every picture she shared, became part of the mosaic I was assembling. Their conversations were sickeningly predictable. Adrian would compliment her looks or her spontaneity, and she'd reply with coy little teases that made my stomach churn. They joked about how clueless I was, about how easy it was to slip away unnoticed. Reading their words felt like rubbing salt into a wound, but I needed to know the full extent of their betrayal. Then came the financials. I checked our credit card statements, something I rarely did since we had separate accounts for personal expenses. There were charges I didn't recognize, fancy dinners at places I'd never been, hotel bookings under her name, even a florist's receipt. It wasn't just infidelity, it was extravagance at my expense. The gall of it all made my blood boil. At home, I played the doting husband, careful not to let my anger show. I brought Elena coffee in the mornings, took Amelia to school, and even planned a family movie night. Every small gesture seemed to throw her off balance. I could tell she was nervous, maybe even suspicious, but she didn't have the courage to ask if something was wrong. Adrian, however, was a different story. I started researching him, digging into his professional and personal life. He wasn't just her boss. He was a man with a reputation for stepping on others to get ahead. There were whispers of past affairs, of office politics turned ugly, and a trail of disgruntled employees who had been discarded like yesterday's news. The more I learned, the more I realized I wasn't just dealing with a man having an affair with my wife. I was dealing with a man who thought he was untouchable. One evening, as Elena worked late yet again, I sat in my car outside Adrian's office. I watched as he left, his usual smug expression plastered across his face. He climbed into his luxury sedan and drove off, oblivious to the fact that I was following him. I wasn't sure what I hoped to find. Maybe I wanted to see where he went after work, or maybe I just wanted to remind myself that he was flesh and blood, not some invincible force. He drove to a high-rise downtown, disappearing into the underground parking lot. I waited outside for a while, but he never came back out. By the time I got home, it was past midnight. Elena was already in bed, her back turned to me as I slipped under the covers. The silence between us felt heavier than ever, but I didn't say a word. Instead, I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing with possibilities. I was done being the quiet observer. It was time to take control of the narrative. The next morning, I made my second move. I called a friend of mine who worked in IT, someone I trusted implicitly. Without giving too many details, I explained that I needed help with a discrete project. He agreed without hesitation, and by the end of the day, I had access to tools that would allow me to monitor Adrian's communications. If Elena wanted to protect him, she'd have to work a lot harder than she was now. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with a mug of coffee, staring at the growing pile of evidence. It wasn't just about what I'd found, it was about what I was going to do with it. My plan wasn't fully formed yet, but one thing was clear. Adrian's world was about to crumble, and Elena was going to watch it happen. I wasn't seeking revenge just for myself anymore. This was for Amelia, for the life we deserved, free of lies and betrayal. And if it meant playing the long game, so be it. Over the next few days, I worked quietly behind the scenes, letting Elena's routine carry on uninterrupted. Her behavior became more erratic though. She'd come home later than usual, her phone never leaving her side. When she was around, she was either overly cheerful or strangely distant, like she wasn't sure which version of herself to present to me. Amelia noticed, too. "Why is Mommy so tired all the time?" she asked one evening as I tucked her into bed. Her innocent question cut deeper than any accusation ever could. I brushed her hair back, kissed her forehead, and promised her things would be better soon. It wasn't much of an answer, but it was all I could give her. Meanwhile, the web I'd spun around Adrian tightened. Thanks to my friend in IT, I now had access to more than just his work email. I had his calendar too. It didn't take long to connect the dots between Elena's work commitments and Adrian's conveniently scheduled client meetings. They weren't even careful about covering their tracks, which made me wonder if arrogance or recklessness fueled their affair. My next step was subtle sabotage. I started small, creating ripples that would eventually turn into waves. A few whispers here and there among Elena's coworkers. Anonymous tips suggesting Adrian might be crossing professional boundaries. I didn't need anyone to act on the rumors immediately. I just needed to plant the seeds of doubt. At home, I leaned harder into the role of the devoted husband. I left sweet notes in Elena's bag, offered to pick her up from work, and even surprised her with a date night. She seemed caught off guard by my sudden attention, but she didn't resist. I wasn't doing it for her, though. I was doing it to remind myself that I had given her every chance to choose the life we'd built together. The turning point came on a Friday evening. Elena had told me she'd be working late again, so I decided to confirm what I already suspected. I parked outside her office around 9 p.m. and waited. Sure enough, Adrian's car pulled up, and moments later, she emerged, laughing as she climbed into the passenger seat. My heart sank, but I stayed calm. This wasn't the time for confrontation. Not yet. I followed them to a swanky hotel downtown, watching from a distance as they checked in. I didn't follow them inside. I didn't need to. Instead, I took a few more photos, time-stamped and damning, then drove home. When Elena returned the next morning, looking disheveled and full of excuses, I played my part perfectly. "I hope you got some rest," I said, handing her a cup of coffee. She avoided my eyes, mumbling something about deadlines and team meetings. I nodded, pretending to buy her story, while silently noting how far we'd fallen from the truth. That weekend, I made my third move. I reached out to a lawyer, not to file anything yet, but to understand my options. I wanted to know where I stood if things came to that. More importantly, I needed to protect Amelia. The lawyer was direct, advising me to document everything meticulously. "The more evidence you have, the stronger your position," she said. I left her office feeling a strange mix of determination and sadness. By Sunday evening, the cracks in Elena's facade were impossible to ignore. At dinner, she barely touched her food, her mind clearly elsewhere. Amelia chatted about her art project, but Elena's responses were mechanical, as if she wasn't even hearing her. Finally, Amelia sighed and looked at me. "Mommy's not listening, Daddy." Elena snapped out of her daze, forcing a smile. "I'm sorry, sweetheart. What were you saying?" Amelia repeated herself, but the damage was done. The warmth in our home had been replaced by something cold and unfamiliar, and it was all I could do to keep it together. That night, as Elena slept, I sat in the living room with my laptop, reviewing everything I'd gathered so far. The texts, the photos, the financial discrepancies. It was all there, a damning trail of evidence that painted a clear picture. But the hardest part wasn't seeing the proof of her betrayal. It was realizing that no matter what I did next, the life I'd worked so hard to build was already shattered. I wasn't ready to make my final move yet. But soon. Very soon. The weight of what I knew hung over every interaction with Elena. She carried on like nothing was wrong, though cracks were beginning to show. I decided it was time to probe, to see how far she'd go to protect her lies. On Monday morning, I suggested we have a family dinner later that week. "You've been so busy lately, I think we all need some time together." "Amelia misses you," I said casually, keeping my tone light. Elena hesitated, her eyes flickering toward her phone. "This week's pretty packed, but I'll try to shuffle some things around." Her response confirmed what I already suspected. She wasn't ready to let go of whatever it was she had with Adrian, even if it meant missing moments with her family. Still, I smiled and thanked her, as if I hadn't noticed the reluctance in her voice. That evening, I tried a different tactic. While Amelia was playing in the next room, I leaned against the kitchen counter as Elena cooked. "You've been working so hard lately," I said, feigning concern. "I hope they're not taking advantage of you at work." She glanced at me, a flicker of guilt crossing her face. "It's just a busy season. Lots of projects coming up. Must be tough, juggling everything. If you ever need to talk or vent, I'm here," I offered, keeping my tone gentle. "Thanks, Daniel," she said, forcing a smile. But she didn't elaborate, and I didn't press. Her walls were firmly in place, and I wasn't going to tear them down yet, not when I was still building my case. The next day, I made my fourth move. I reached out to a contact in the industry, someone who knew Adrian professionally but had no ties to me or Elena. Over coffee, I steered the conversation toward Adrian, casually mentioning his reputation. My contact didn't hold back. "Adrian's charming, sure, but he's also ruthless. The kind of guy who sees people as tools to get what he wants. There've been rumors about him and some of his employees, but nothing ever sticks. He's careful. Careful." The word echoed in my mind as I drove home. If Adrian was as calculating as my contact suggested, it meant one thing. He wasn't just toying with Elena. He was playing a longer game, and she was too blinded by his attention to see it. That evening, as Elena texted on the couch, I asked her casually, "How's Adrian?" She froze for a split second before recovering. "He's fine, I guess." "Why?" "Just curious," I said, shrugging. "You mention him a lot. Seems like you two are working closely." She laughed nervously. "Well, he's my boss. Of course, we work closely." "Of course," I echoed, keeping my expression neutral. Inside, my heart pounded. Her deflection confirmed what I already knew. She was lying to my face. That night, as I lay awake in bed, I realized something. Elena wasn't just protecting herself. She was protecting Adrian too. Whether it was loyalty or fear, I wasn't sure. But one thing was clear: if she wouldn't admit the truth, I'd have to drag it out of her another way. By midweek, I was ready to push things further. The dinner I'd suggested for Friday became the perfect stage to test Elena's loyalty, not just to me, but to the life we'd built. I wanted to see if she'd prioritize her family over Adrian when forced to make a choice. Thursday night, as we cleaned up after dinner, I casually mentioned the dinner plans again. "So, I was thinking of inviting a couple of friends over for dessert after dinner tomorrow. You're still good to make it, right?" Elena's hand paused midair as she placed a plate in the dishwasher. "Tomorrow." "Yeah, tomorrow. I mentioned it on Monday," I said, keeping my tone light. "I figured it'd be nice to make it a little more special." "Amelia's excited." She hesitated, her face carefully neutral. "I'll check my calendar. Work's been hectic, and I think Adrian wanted to go over a project." My chest tightened, but I forced myself to smile. "Oh, come on, it's just one night. Adrian can survive without you for a few hours." She looked torn, like she was weighing her options. "I'll try," she said finally, her voice lacking conviction. "Great," I said, pretending to be satisfied. "I'll grab some dessert from that bakery you love. What's the one you always talk about?" "Lavender's." Her smile returned, this time genuine. "Lavender's. Their tarts are amazing." I made a mental note of her favorite flavors, not because I cared about impressing her, but because I wanted to eliminate any excuses she might have for skipping the dinner. The next day, I set the stage carefully. I left work early to clean the house, cook her favorite meal, and pick up those damn tarts. By the time she came home, everything was ready. Candles on the table, Amelia coloring a card for her, and the house filled with the warm scent of rosemary chicken. When Elena walked in, she looked stunned. "Wow, you've been busy," she said, glancing around the room. "Just wanted to make tonight special," I said, kissing her cheek. "You deserve it." She glanced at her phone, then at Amelia, who was beaming with excitement. "What's all this for, Daddy?" Amelia asked. "Just a little family celebration," I said, ruffling her hair. "Mommy's been working so hard, and I thought we should show her how much we appreciate her." Elena's smile faltered for a fraction of a second before she forced it back into place. "That's really sweet." We sat down to dinner, and for a moment, things felt almost normal. Amelia chattered about her day at school, Elena responded with practiced enthusiasm, and I played the part of the doting husband. But beneath the surface, the tension was palpable. As we finished eating, Elena's phone buzzed on the table. She glanced at the screen, her expression flickering with something I couldn't quite place. Guilt? Anxiety? Both. Everything okay? I asked, feigning concern. Yeah, it's just work, she said, quickly silencing the notification. Amelia looked up, her brow furrowed. Mommy, are you leaving again? No, sweetheart, Elena said quickly. Not tonight. Her answer felt rehearsed, and I wondered if Adrian had been testing her resolve as much as I was. Later, after Amelia was in bed, I brought out the dessert. Elena picked at her tart, her mind clearly elsewhere. Finally, I leaned back in my chair and broke the silence. You've been distracted lately, I said, keeping my tone conversational. Is everything okay? She froze, her fork halfway to her mouth. What do you mean? I don't know, I said with a shrug. You just seem distant, like your mind's always somewhere else. She laughed nervously. It's just work stress, Daniel. Nothing to worry about. I nodded, watching her carefully. If you say so. Just let me know if there's anything I can do to help. Her eyes flicked to the clock on the wall. I think I'm going to call it a night, she said, standing up abruptly. Thanks for dinner. It was really thoughtful. I let her go without pressing further. The cracks were widening, and soon, everything would come tumbling down. The next morning, I woke early, determined to stay ahead of whatever game Elena thought she was playing. She was already up, sipping coffee at the kitchen table, scrolling through her phone. Her expression was tense, her thumb hesitating over the screen before typing something quickly. Morning, I said, keeping my tone casual as I poured myself a cup. She jumped slightly, her phone slipping out of her hand and landing face down on the table. Morning, she replied, her voice strained. What's got you up so early? I asked, settling into the chair across from her. Just catching up on emails, she said, a little too quickly. Her hand rested protectively on the phone, as if she feared I might snatch it away. Work never seems to stop for you, I said, forcing a smile. You should take a break today. Let's do something as a family. She hesitated, glancing at her phone again. I'll try, but I might have to step away for a bit. Adrian wants to go over the presentation for Monday. I nodded, pretending not to notice the way her voice softened when she said his name. Of course. Family first, though, right? Her smile was tight, forced. Right. Later that afternoon, while she was upstairs working, I decided to dig a little deeper. I booted up my laptop and opened the shared cloud account, where her texts and photos continued to sync. The newest messages were just as damning as the ones before. Plans for another meeting with Adrian that evening, thinly veiled behind professional jargon. The texts made my blood boil, but I forced myself to stay calm. This wasn't the time to act on anger. Instead, I took screenshots and saved them in a folder labeled Insurance. When I heard footsteps coming down the stairs, I quickly closed the laptop and grabbed a book, pretending to read. Elena entered the room, looking refreshed and carrying her laptop bag. Heading out? I asked, keeping my tone light. Just for a little while, she said, avoiding my eyes. I'll be back by dinner. Take your time, I said, forcing a smile. We'll be here. As soon as the door closed behind her, I sprang into action. This time, I wasn't going to follow her. She was too good at covering her tracks. Instead, I called my friend in IT. By the time Elena returned, I had what I needed. My friend had sent me a log of Adrian's recent movements, meeting schedules, emails, and even his hotel reservations. It was all there, a roadmap of their deception. He'd booked a room at the same hotel they frequented, under a pseudonym that wasn't clever enough to fool anyone looking closely. Elena came through the door just as Amelia and I were setting the table for dinner. You're just in time, I said cheerfully. We waited for you. Sorry, she said, brushing past me to drop her bag by the stairs. I lost track of time. She looked tired, distracted, and something else. Anxious, maybe. I wondered if she sensed the noose tightening around her. As we ate, I watched her carefully. She picked at her food, barely contributing to the conversation. Amelia, oblivious to the tension, chattered about her latest art project, filling the silence with her innocent joy. It was a stark contrast to the storm brewing beneath the surface. After dinner, as Elena headed upstairs to rest, I took Amelia aside. "Hey, sweetheart, how about we plan something fun for next weekend? Just the two of us." Her eyes lit up. "Like a daddy-daughter day?" "Exactly," I said, smiling. "We'll make it special." As Amelia ran off to her room, I felt a pang of guilt. She deserved better than this, better than a family fractured by lies. But if Elena wasn't going to put her first, I would. That night, I stared at the evidence piling up on my laptop. The texts, the photos, the financial records. It was all there, a damning case against Elena and Adrian. But I wasn't ready to confront her yet. Not until I was sure the fallout wouldn't hurt Amelia. I closed the laptop and leaned back in my chair, the weight of the situation pressing down on me. The endgame was approaching, and I needed to be ready. The next day, I decided it was time to make my presence felt. Not directly, but enough to rattle them. If Adrian and Elena thought their affair was safely tucked away in the shadows, I wanted to cast some light on it. I started with Adrian. Using the evidence I'd gathered, I drafted an anonymous email. It was polite, almost professional in tone, but the contents were anything but. Attached were screenshots of texts between him and Elena, along with the hotel reservations under his pseudonym. The message was simple: "I know what you've been doing. Stop, or this will become public." I sent it to his work email late that night, timing it so he'd see it first thing in the morning. Then I waited. By lunchtime the next day, the first signs of fallout began to show. Elena was unusually tense, pacing the kitchen with her phone glued to her hand. She snapped at Amelia over something trivial, spilled juice on the counter, and then immediately apologized, hugging her tightly. The guilt in her eyes was palpable. "What's wrong?" I asked casually, stepping into the kitchen. "Nothing," she said too quickly, forcing a smile. "Just a stressful day." I nodded, pretending to accept her answer. "Let me know if there's anything I can do." She didn't reply, her attention already back on her phone. I caught a glimpse of Adrian's name at the top of the screen before she turned away. That evening, I got my first response. Indirect, but unmistakable. Adrian's professional social media accounts went dark, his previously active profiles scrubbed clean of recent activity. It was a small victory, but a satisfying one. He was shaken, and that was exactly what I wanted. Elena, meanwhile, grew more distracted as the week went on. She spent more time on her phone, whispering into it late at night when she thought I was asleep. Once, I caught her pacing in the backyard, her voice tense as she spoke into the receiver. I couldn't hear much, but one phrase stood out: "We need to be more careful." The next morning, I took Amelia to school early and decided to make my next move. I called Adrian's office, asking to speak with him directly. When his secretary answered, I introduced myself as a concerned husband. "There's been some questionable behavior involving Mr. Adrian and my wife Elena," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I thought you should be aware." The secretary's polite demeanor froze for a moment, then she recovered. "I'm sorry, who is this again?" "I'm not looking for trouble," I said, ignoring her question. "I just thought you'd want to know what kind of man is representing your company." I hung up before she could respond, a wave of adrenaline coursing through me. It wasn't a direct attack, but it was enough to stir the waters. If Adrian was smart, he'd start to feel the walls closing in. That evening, Elena came home looking drained. She barely spoke during dinner, retreating to the bedroom as soon as the dishes were cleared. I followed her up an hour later, finding her sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at her phone. "Everything okay?" I asked, leaning against the doorframe. She jumped, quickly locking the screen. "Yeah, just tired." I crossed the room and sat beside her. "You've been working yourself too hard," I said, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Maybe it's time to take a break." She nodded absently, her eyes fixed on a spot on the floor. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. She looked small, fragile, like the weight of her lies was finally catching up to her. But then I remembered the messages, the hotel rooms, the laughter she shared with Adrian, and the sympathy evaporated. "Let me know if you need anything," I said, standing up. "I'm here for you." She didn't reply, and I left her there, alone with her thoughts. That night, I couldn't sleep. The tension in the house was suffocating, and I knew it was only a matter of time before everything came to a head. The question was, who would make the first move, Elena, Adrian, or me? By the end of the week, the strain in the house was palpable. Elena had become a shadow of herself, her usual cheerful demeanor replaced by skittishness and half-hearted smiles. It was clear she knew something was wrong, even if she couldn't put her finger on it. Friday evening, as I was helping Amelia with her homework, Elena came downstairs, dressed in a sleek blouse and heels. She avoided my eyes as she grabbed her bag from the counter. "Heading out?" I asked, keeping my voice casual. She hesitated for a beat too long. "Just a quick meeting. I won't be late." Amelia looked up, her brows knitting together. "Again, Mommy?" Elena knelt beside her, smoothing back her hair. "Just this once, sweetheart. I promise we'll do something fun tomorrow." I said nothing as the door clicked shut behind her. Instead, I pulled Amelia close, her small arms wrapping around my neck. "Daddy, why does Mommy always leave?" she whispered. I swallowed the lump in my throat. "Sometimes grown-ups get busy, but you and I kissed her forehead, will always have time for each other." Elena didn't come home until past midnight. I was waiting in the living room, a book in my lap and the evidence folder open on my laptop. When I heard her keys in the lock, I closed it and stood up, leaning casually against the doorframe. "You're late," I said, my tone neutral. She jumped slightly, clutching her bag to her chest. "I told you I might be." "No text, no call," I replied, watching her closely. "That's not like you." She bristled. I didn't think I needed to check in like a child. "It's not about checking in, Elena. It's about respect." She opened her mouth to argue, but then she closed it, her expression softening. "I'm sorry, okay? Work's just been overwhelming." "Is that what this is?" I asked, taking a step closer. "Work." Her eyes darted to the side, her hand tightening on the strap of her bag. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means I've been patient, Elena. I've given you space, trusted you, even when you started acting different." My voice was calm, measured, but I could feel the anger simmering beneath the surface. "But patience has its limits." She laughed nervously, a brittle sound that didn't reach her eyes. "You're being ridiculous." I tilted my head, studying her. "Am I?" There was a beat of silence before she turned on her heel, heading for the stairs. "I'm too tired for this," she muttered. But I wasn't done. "Tired from what?" I called after her. "A long meeting with Adrian?" She froze mid-step, her hand gripping the railing. Slowly, she turned to face me, her expression a mixture of shock and fear. "What are you talking about?" I took a step forward, my heart pounding. "You think I don't know? About the texts, the hotel rooms, the lies." Her face paled, and she staggered slightly, her hand gripping the banister for support. "Daniel." "Don't," I said, my voice hardening. "Don't insult me by pretending." For a moment, she said nothing, her eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape. Then, finally, she spoke. "It's not what you think." I laughed bitterly. "It never is it?" She opened her mouth to respond, but I held up a hand, silencing her. "I have proof, Elena. Everything. The messages, the pictures, the receipts. So unless you're going to deny all of that, don't waste my time." Her shoulders sagged, and she looked down at her feet. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she said quietly. "Meaning it doesn't erase what you've done," I replied coldly. "You betrayed me, you betrayed Amelia. And for what? A thrill. A man who sees you as nothing more than a distraction." She flinched at my words, but I didn't stop. "You made your choice, Elena. Now you'll have to live with it." That night, I slept in Amelia's room, her small hand tucked into mine as she drifted off to sleep. My mind raced with plans and contingencies, but one thing was clear. The facade was crumbling, and there was no going back. The morning after our confrontation, the air in the house was thick with tension. Elena avoided me entirely, staying upstairs while I made breakfast for Amelia. I tried to keep things normal for her sake, but even she sensed something was off. "Is Mommy mad at you?" she asked, her voice small as she picked at her pancakes. I crouched beside her chair, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Mommy and I are figuring some things out," I said gently. "But you don't have to worry, okay? I'll always be here for you." She nodded, though her big brown eyes stayed clouded with worry. I hugged her tightly, silently vowing to shield her from the storm brewing in the background. Elena finally came downstairs around noon, her face pale and her eyes puffy from what I guessed was a sleepless night. She poured herself a cup of coffee without a word, the silence between us heavy and suffocating. "I think we should talk," I said, breaking the quiet. She stiffened but didn't look at me. "Not in front of Amelia." "She's in her room," I said. "It's just us." Elena sat at the kitchen table, her hands trembling slightly as she wrapped them around her mug. I don't even know where to start. I sat across from her, folding my arms on the table. "How about with the truth?" She flinched but nodded. "It wasn't supposed to mean anything," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "Adrian and it just happened. I didn't plan it." "Spare me the clichés," I said, my tone sharper than I intended. "You've been lying to me for months, Elena. Sneaking around, spending time with him instead of your family. Did you really think I wouldn't notice?" Tears welled in her eyes, but I felt no sympathy. "I was unhappy," she admitted. "I felt invisible, like you didn't see me anymore." I laughed bitterly. "Invisible? Elena, I've been here, every day, building this life with you. Taking care of Amelia, supporting you through everything. If you felt invisible, that's on you, not me." She looked down, her hands tightening around the mug. "I didn't know how to fix it. So instead of talking to me, you turned to Adrian," I said, my voice cold. "A man who sees you as nothing more than a conquest." Her head snapped up, anger flashing in her eyes. "That's not true." "It is," I shot back. "You think he cares about you? You're a game to him, Elena. And now you've destroyed everything for what? Validation." Her shoulders sagged, and for a moment, she looked utterly defeated. "I never wanted to hurt you or Amelia." "Well, you did," I said flatly. "And now you need to decide what happens next." She blinked at me, confused. "What do you mean?" "You can end things with Adrian and try to rebuild the life you've destroyed," I said. "Or you can pack your bags and leave. But one way or another, this stops now." Elena didn't give me an answer right away. She spent the rest of the day in a daze, alternating between hovering around Amelia and retreating to the bedroom. I stayed out of her way, focusing on Amelia and keeping things as normal as possible. That evening, I got a call from my lawyer. The papers were ready. All I had to do was give the word, and the process would begin. I stared at the folder on my desk for a long time, the weight of the decision pressing down on me. Finally, I tucked the folder into the drawer and closed it. I wasn't ready to pull the trigger just yet. Not until I knew for sure where Elena stood. By Sunday, Elena seemed to realize her time was running out. Her every move felt calculated, as if she were weighing her options while trying to keep up appearances. But I knew better. The clock was ticking, and I wasn't going to let her delay the inevitable. That afternoon, she sat beside me on the couch while Amelia was upstairs, her expression strained. "Daniel," she began hesitantly, "I want to fix this. For Amelia's sake." Her words hung in the air, heavy with insincerity. I turned to face her, my expression unreadable. "Fix this?" I repeated. "How do you plan to do that?" "I'll stop seeing Adrian," she said quickly. "I'll focus on us, on our family." I studied her, searching for any sign of genuine remorse. "Why now?" I asked. "Why not months ago, before this got so far out of hand?" Her eyes darted away. "I made a mistake. I know that now." "No, Elena," I said, my voice low but firm. "You made a choice. Over and over again, you chose him. So forgive me if I don't believe you're suddenly ready to put this family first." Her face crumpled, tears spilling down her cheeks. "What do you want me to say? That I'm a horrible person? That I don't deserve a second chance?" "I want you to be honest," I said. "Not just with me, but with yourself. Why are you really here? Because you want to make things right? Or because you're afraid of what happens if you leave? She said nothing, her silence speaking volumes. That evening, while Elena put Amelia to bed, I made my next move. I sent another email to Adrian, this time more direct. End it now, or everyone will know. Your colleagues, your superiors, your wife. Your choice. It wasn't a bluff. I had everything I needed to destroy him if he didn't back off. And judging by Elena's fragile state, he wasn't offering her the security she thought she'd find with him. When she came downstairs, I confronted her with the calm I'd been clinging to for weeks. I sent Adrian a message, I said bluntly. Her eyes widened in panic. What did you do? Gave him a choice, I replied. End it, or face the consequences. Daniel, she whispered, her voice trembling. You can't do that. I already did, I said, crossing my arms. If he cares about his career, his reputation, or his family, he'll walk away. Tears streamed down her face as she shook her head. You don't understand. What's there to understand, Elena? I asked, my patience wearing thin. You've been lying to me, sneaking around, putting him above your own daughter. And now you're worried about his feelings? His life. It's not just about him, she said desperately. If this gets out, it'll ruin everything. No, Elena, I said, my voice sharp. You ruined everything the moment you decided our family wasn't enough for you. The next morning, Adrian's response came through. His email was curt, filled with barely disguised rage. Fine. It's over. You win. But don't think this is the end of it. I stared at the screen for a long time, feeling a hollow sense of victory. He'd backed down, but his words carried a warning I couldn't ignore. This wasn't over. Not yet. When Elena came into the kitchen, I handed her my phone, letting her read Adrian's message. Her face crumpled as she sank into a chair, her hands shaking. It's done, I said. Now you need to decide if you're staying here to fix the mess you've made, or if you're walking away. She looked up at me, her expression a mixture of fear and guilt. I don't want to lose you, Daniel, she whispered. You already have, I said coldly. The only question is what happens next. The weight of Adrian's message lingered in the air between us, unspoken but undeniable. Elena sat at the kitchen table, staring at the phone like it might explode in her hands. Her tear-streaked face showed no relief, no closure, only fear. I watched her from across the room, my arms crossed. This isn't just about Adrian, I said finally, breaking the silence. It's about you. About who you've become. She flinched at my words, her gaze dropping to the table. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. Stop saying that, I snapped, my patience unraveling. You've said it 100 times, and it means nothing. You don't trip and fall into months of lies and betrayal. You chose this, Elena. Over me, over Amelia. So stop pretending it was an accident. Her tears came harder now, but I felt no urge to comfort her. That part of me had been eroded by her deception. I want to fix this, she choked out. Please, Daniel. I'll do whatever it takes. I shook my head. I don't think you even know what fixing this means. Do you really think we can go back to the way things were? That I'll ever look at you and not see what you've done? I don't care about Adrian, she said desperately. I care about you. About Amelia. I was stupid, I was selfish, but I don't want to lose my family. You don't care about him? I asked, my voice laced with disbelief. Then why did you risk everything for him? Because you were bored? Because you wanted attention? Her silence was deafening. That night, I left her to her thoughts and slept in Amelia's room again. Holding my daughter close, I felt a clarity I hadn't had in weeks. Whatever happened next, my priority was her. Not Elena, not the life I'd once thought we could rebuild. The next morning, I handed Elena an envelope. These are the divorce papers, I said simply. They're not filed yet, but they will be if you can't prove to me, and to Amelia, that you're committed to making this right. Her hands trembled as she took the envelope. What does that mean? She asked, her voice small. It means no more lies, I said firmly. No more sneaking around. No more excuses. And you tell Amelia the truth. Not the details, but enough so she understands why things are the way they are. Her eyes widened in panic. You want me to tell her? She's just a child. She won't understand. She'll understand more than you think, I replied. And she deserves honesty. You owe her that much. Elena clutched the envelope to her chest, her face pale. And if I do all of that? I stared at her, my expression unreadable. Then maybe we figure out how to move forward. But don't mistake that for forgiveness, Elena. That's going to take a long time, if it's even possible. That afternoon, Elena sat down with Amelia while I watched from the kitchen. Her voice shook as she explained that Mommy and Daddy were going through a difficult time, that they loved her very much but needed to work on some things to make their family strong again. Amelia looked confused, her wide eyes darting between us. Did I do something wrong? She asked softly. No, sweetheart, Elena said quickly, tears spilling down her cheeks. This isn't your fault. It's mine. Mommy made a mistake, and now we're trying to fix it. Amelia hugged her, her small arms barely reaching around Elena's frame. I love you, Mommy, she whispered. I love you too, Elena sobbed, clinging to her like a lifeline. I turned away, unable to watch. The pain in Amelia's voice was more than I could bear, but it also solidified my resolve. No matter what happened between Elena and me, Amelia would always come first. That evening, I told Elena my decision. You can stay, I said, my voice even. For now. But only for Amelia's sake. If you want to fix this, you'll have to earn back every ounce of trust you've lost. She nodded, her eyes red and swollen. I'll do whatever it takes, she said. I swear. We'll see, I replied, my tone cold. But don't mistake this for a clean slate. This is your chance to prove you deserve to be here. Don't waste it. The days that followed were filled with an uneasy quiet. Elena stayed close to home, throwing herself into parenting Amelia as though sheer effort could undo the months of damage. She volunteered for every school drop-off, every bedtime story, every little chore that might have gone unnoticed before. But it wasn't lost on me, or Amelia, for that matter. Mommy's always here now, Amelia said one evening as I tucked her in. Do you think she's sad? I stroked her hair, choosing my words carefully. She's just trying to be a better mommy. And that's a good thing, isn't it? Amelia nodded sleepily, but her brow furrowed as she drifted off. I knew that look. She was processing more than she let on, and it made me ache to see her so thoughtful when she should have been carefree. For Elena and me, the truce was tenuous at best. We coexisted in the same house, each step forward feeling like it rested on a fragile foundation. She tried to engage me in small talk, offering apologies in veiled ways. Through dinner she'd cooked or by quietly leaving my favorite coffee on the counter in the mornings. But I wasn't ready to forgive. Not yet. Maybe not ever. One night, as we sat in the living room after putting Amelia to bed, Elena broke the silence. Do you think this is going to work? She asked, her voice quiet, almost tentative. I stared at the flickering TV screen, not looking at her. I don't know, I admitted. That's up to you. She didn't respond immediately. When I finally glanced at her, she looked small, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. I don't want to lose this. Lose us. I hear you, I said evenly. But words don't mean much right now. She nodded, swallowing hard. What do you need from me? Consistency, I said without hesitation. Honesty. Transparency. No more secrets, no more lies. And patience. Because this isn't going to be fixed overnight, if it even can be. I'll do my best, she whispered. You'll have to, I replied, my voice steady but cold. Weeks turned into months, and slowly, the rhythms of our household began to stabilize. Elena threw herself into her role as a mother, and I allowed her to. Amelia needed that, and I wasn't about to stand in the way of her healing. As for me, I focused on work, on maintaining some semblance of normalcy for Amelia, and on carving out space for myself. Adrian, true to his word, stayed away. I heard through mutual contacts that his career had taken a hit after whispers of his behavior reached the higher-ups. It wasn't the public downfall I'd envisioned, but it was enough to know he wasn't untouched. One evening, as Amelia played in her room, Elena approached me in the kitchen. I've been looking into therapists, she said quietly. I think we should try counseling. The suggestion caught me off guard, and I looked at her closely. Her face was calm, open, not the defensive, desperate expression she'd worn for so long. You think it'll help? I asked. I don't know, she admitted. But I think we need to try. I hesitated, then nodded. Set it up. Her shoulders sagged with relief, and for the first time in months, I saw a glimmer of hope in her eyes. But hope wasn't trust, and it wasn't love. Those things had been fractured, and I wasn't sure if they could be mended. In the end, the path forward wasn't clear. Some days, I felt a flicker of what we'd once had, a warmth in her smile, a shared moment with Amelia that reminded me of why I'd fought so hard to build this life. Other days, the weight of her betrayal loomed too large to ignore. What I did know was that I wasn't staying for her. I was staying for Amelia, for the chance to give her stability and love, even if the foundation beneath us was cracked. And as I watched my daughter laugh in the glow of the living room light that evening, I realized that was enough for now. Maybe it always would be.